Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to another episode on Soldier Speaks English. And this program format, I've been, conducting this program, the Great Power Rivalry, for quite some time now. It's got a very dramatic intro, but I was not sure about the copyright, so I've not run the intro. But I've again today here with me my dear friend Theo A-Mullis. Theo A-Mullis is a former British police officer turned independent journalist, and he is a war correspondent. He covers Ukraine war, and he travels quite extensively in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. He's been reporting on ground from the Ukraine, and he reports on the Substack channel, but he is also on YouTube, and I would request you to please follow his YouTube channel, because he will give you what's exactly happening on the ground, the no nonsense, straightforward, reporting from on ground front lines. And his channel you can see below. So first of all, let me welcome Theo. Theo, how are you?
I'm doing very well, and thank you very much for the kind words. I report on the war in Ukraine, but I also report on very much what you talk about as well, this great power rivalry. But for me, it's this ideological conflict between democracy and authoritarianism that we're seeing taking place across the planet. So there's a new podcast out at the moment, which is also on my channel. And the latest episode is one where I talk to a British fighter in Ukraine. It's very, very interesting.
Well, let me tell you, I myself subscribed to Theo's channel and his Substack as well. But Theo bring out perspective which has never been heard before. So in this two-part series, in the first part, we are going to discuss something very important. Can Ukraine win against Russia? And then in the second part, we'll ask Theo that what is the leverage the Pakistani generals have got by supplying ammunition to the Ukraine war? And in this context, will India ditch Russia for the USA in the context of this Ukraine war, and why they're buying the oil? And there was Diwali message just day before yesterday, by President Trump, in which he said that, well, I've told Modi not to wage war against Pakistan, and the Pakistani media really, blasted that message out. India is trying to follow an independent foreign policy, and there is a visible shift toward Russia. Are they going to ditch Russia for benefits, for economic benefits, for doing business with the USA? So that will be discussed as well. We will touch upon the topic maybe in this part, but mainly we'll discuss it in part 2, which will come tomorrow. So coming to the first part and the first question, there are very important sides to this particular question as well. Why I am asking this question, that can Ukraine win against Russia? Because this is a story. This is a story by Independent, in which the headline is "Ukraine cannot win against Russia, warns British Field Marshal." Now, Field Marshal Lord Richards tells the Independent's Sam Kelly that Ukraine has been given false hope by its Western allies and cannot triumph against Russia unless NATO forces join the fight. So, what do you have to say about that, Theo?
I would answer your question with another question. Can the Taliban defeat the United States? Could the Mujahideen defeat the Soviets?
No, they can't, because of the capabilities. It's a purely military question. I mean, if you go to the United States, have been to Afghanistan for 20 years, but they couldn't defeat the Taliban. Why? Because it is their own terrain, and they fight in an unconventional manner. But if you say that the Taliban wants to go and attack the USA and win, well, that's not going to happen. Of course, that can't happen. And America and Afghanistan are not neighbors.
Exactly. So that boils down to, what is your theory of victory? And this is where Lord Richard gets it wrong. So he posits Ukraine can't win because There's no way that they could push the Russians in a combined arms military offensive out of Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk, and out of Crimea. No, certainly not. But that's not Ukraine's theory of victory. Ukraine's theory of victory, Ukraine's concept of victory is survival as an independent nation that gets to choose what it wants to do. And Russia's theory of victory is the antithesis of that. Russia wants to add another piece to its continental empire, because that's the kind of thinking that's going on in the Kremlin. They seek security through expansion. Now, the kind of war Ukraine is fighting is a defensive war, and the lines are incredibly static. Ukraine's armed forces have gotten extremely good at attriting Russian troops. Russian casualties have passed 1 million earlier this year. Their monthly casualty rate, it's been reported, sits between 35 to 50,000. And their recruitment rate sits at about 32,000. And that's an enormous figure. This is a higher attrition rate than any war in recent European history since World War II. It is, in fact, a higher attrition rate than parts of World War II and World War I for the Russian armed forces. When Yevgeny Prigozhin was recruiting, he was the former Wagner mercenary leader in Russia, was recruiting prisoners. He says, we are burning through ammunition at a faster rate than the Battle of Stalingrad, which is a hell of a statement. Now, I sent some images. There's a map, which I'd like you to bring up, the one divided between red and white.
Yeah, here we go.
So this is a map of an area of the front lines. It is in the east, in the middle. So for your audience, the red part is the part that is controlled by the Russians. The white part is the part controlled by the Ukrainians. So you've got the cities of Konstantinivka in that sort of salient. And I want to direct your audience's attention towards the blue circle. That is the city of Bakhmut. It's not really a city much anymore because it was absolutely leveled. There was enormous fighting there in May of 2023, which is when that city fell. And the key on that map, which your audience might be able to see in the bottom right-hand corner, is 5 kilometers. So the Russians have managed to advance, giving them the benefit of the doubt, maybe 10 to 15 kilometers from that position since May of 2023. And in that period, they have lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Killed, wounded, missing. That is unsustainable. And the Russians have been doubling down on this fight because this is the mistake that authoritarian regimes make. But at the same time as this is happening, the Ukrainians are fighting this very effective defensive war. Ukraine is conducting more and more deep strikes to hit the Russians where it hurts. And that's in the oil infrastructure. I sent you another map, which is of the wider part of the Russian Federation. Now, here is a map of oil infrastructure facilities that have been hit by Ukrainian missiles and Ukrainian drones. And that map doesn't cover the whole of the Russian Federation. If you were to go further east, there's a couple more facilities bordering the Chinese border that have also been hit.
Yeah, I wanted to come to that. That's very interesting in the context of great power rivalry, or you may like to call it the ideological warfare, but we are heading towards a World War III scenario, or maybe it is already happening in the shape of the conflicts which are brewing all around the world. And maybe what we are witnessing is just the beginning. In the Ukraine, what we're witnessing is the beginning of the World War III, and it's going on. In the context of the great power rivalry, or in the preparation of World War III, howsoever, or the ideological warfare, howsoever you may want to interpret it, tell me, there are reports that Ukrainians have hit just north of China in northern Mongolia, right? Almost at the border of China, they've hit the Russian oil facilities. how have they been able to manage this? And that is the first thing. How they have been able to manage it first. Second, in the context of the great power rivalry, where does this attack sit? And thirdly, well, the Field Marshal is saying, the British Field Marshal is saying, Sir Lord Richards is saying that, well, Ukraine cannot defeat Russia. How come they're able to attack so deep into the Russian territory, right at the Chinese borders? Then there are three questions.
With all respect to his lordship, I guess would be the technical term.
Yeah.
He fought in GWOT, and this war is completely different. Drones are an enormous force multiplier. This is a stand-up, drag-out fight involving trench lines and drones. Drones make up the greatest proportion of casualty losses on either side, are down to FPV drones, up to 80%. The rest is artillery, and small arms and such is like 3%. GWOT, an entirely different game. So no, I mean, Ukraine, with its current armed forces, could not push the Russians out. Perhaps if we'd given them more in 2022, if we'd given them Challengers, etc., if we'd given them Abrams, Leopards, then the enormous Ukrainian counteroffensives that we saw then could have gone further.
But in all fairness, Theo, sorry to interrupt you. In all fairness, what his lordship is saying, what the Field Marshal is saying, what Field Marshal Lord Richards is saying is that we need to give resources to the Ukrainians to fight the Russian and stop the war in Ukraine. Do not let Russia expand. I mean, he's making a case for NATO to, join in the war. I think what he's doing is a wise thing to do as far as the Western perspective or the European perspective is concerned, isn't it?
Well,
he's not questioning the prowess. He's not questioning the fighting prowess of the Ukrainians, but he's just making a case for NATO to get actively involved. What do you think?
I think, to be honest, NATO isn't ready. I would take a Russian division against any NATO division at the moment, because the Russians understand what modern war is, and I would certainly take any Ukrainian division against a NATO division. When the head of one of Ukraine's best drone units went to a NATO facility, the unit's called Mygar's Birds, and he was asked, "Oh, what do you think about this base?" And he said, "Well, give me one platoon and some FPV drones, and I will turn this into Pearl Harbor in 10 minutes. So get me within 2 kilometers."
So you're so all right. NATO cannot get involved. What he's saying is that what we have done in case of Ukraine's is to encourage Ukraine to fight, but not given them the means to win. The former chief of defense staff told the Independence podcast, "World of trouble." All right.
Well, that's an area where I agree.
He's actually saying what effectively you are saying, that he is advocating means for the Ukrainians. They know that Ukrainians can fight. So, I'm just providing you with a counter narrative.
I mean, I agree with him there. We need to give Ukraine the means to win. And what has been seemingly policy for the last 3 years is to give Ukraine enough to survive, but not enough to crush the enemy. And Ukraine has actually taken that and crushed the enemy on a number of fronts. But if we'd have given them much more, much earlier, we wouldn't necessarily be in this situation. The Ukrainians could have pushed further. They may have held the city of Bakhmut. And it is telling to the fighting spirit of the Ukrainians that despite how little we've given them, I mean, most of the stuff. Okay, let me ask another question. What new equipment have we given the Ukrainians?
Well, I don't think. You tell me. They've got legacy and vintage weapons, and that we're going to discuss it. The ammunition is being provided by the Pakistanis, and that's why the Pakistani military junta is, able to control the country's democracy and keep the democracy under hostage. And that's why you've got a channel, Dictators v Democrats, and that's why we're discussing it.
So we have given Ukraine, other than a few standout systems like Scalp or Storm Shadow, nothing new. Challenger 2, that's an 80s, 90s system. Javelin, NLAW, these are 80s systems. Most of the rounds, as in small arms, are ball ammunition. They're not green or black tip armor-piercing ammunition. This is stuff from before level 4 plates were invented. So they're getting the stuff that's been sitting in NATO warehouses for a very long time, and that we needed to probably get rid of anyway. And they've taken it and run with it and done extremely well with it. But if we'd given them, or if we'd activated, built factories to put out the new stuff, which we are doing, but slowly, then again, it could have been different. But I want to emphasize that I disagree with the Field Marshal in that I think the idea of victory that he's putting forward is not Ukraine's idea of victory. Ukraine's idea of victory is being able to continue as a nation. And the concept of that is to economically and in terms of manpower, exhaust Russia to the point where the oligarchs say, this is enough. Because, to be honest, very few people in the higher echelons of Russia actually want this war. They were blindsided by it. You could see it on their faces in that famous Security Council meeting just prior to the invasion. None of them knew what was happening.
Yeah. All right. So finally, Theo, for this part, how come the Ukrainians, if they are not able to fight as per the Field Marshal, if they're not going to win from, if they can't win over Russia, how come the Ukrainians are able to hit deep within Russia on the Chinese border on north of Mongolia? And they've just done that. I mean, who is doing it? And how come they're able to do it?
So the Ukrainians, this is something you have to understand about the Ukrainian mindset and the Ukrainian people. Ukraine is where all of the high-tech stuff went on in the Soviet Union, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're a nation of engineers. So Operation Spiderweb, which is something that happened earlier in the year, where Ukraine was able to fill trucks, lorries, with FPV drones and explosives, and have them driven deep into Russia to then deploy and fly them into Russian military aircraft. Things like that. The Ukrainians are innovative and pretty clever. So they're able to get teams deep into Russia to deploy this kind of thing. And there's also things just like hiring Russians to commit sabotage. There is a not insignificant insurgency taking place in the temporarily occupied areas of Ukraine and within Russia. Military recruitment offices have been burned down, conscription papers have been burned down, military facilities attacked. And yeah, that's the sneaky cloak and dagger intelligence stuff. But on the tech side as well, Ukraine's just developed a homegrown cruise missile with a 1.5 ton warhead called the Flamingo. Yeah, it's enormous. It looks like a V1 doodle bug from World War II, except much larger. And it's not as advanced as, say, a Tomahawk. It's not as fast as, say, a Tomahawk, but it's cheap. It's faster than a Geran or Shahid. It's harder to shoot down. And it's enormous. 1.5 tons of warhead sitting at the front of that thing. And they're launching these at Russian oil facilities because Russia's oil is its weakness. And Russia's size is also its weakness because Russia doesn't have enough air defense to spread around the entire country. But the oil facilities are spread around the entire country. So it's a constant game of where's Russia going to put their air defense? Okay, well, the Ukrainians are going to attack the oil facility where the air defense isn't. And Russia's simply too big to defend all of it. And if you hit the oil, as we're seeing now, even in Moscow and Petersburg, oil prices at the petrol stations are increasing enormously because Russia is having to divert away from the domestic market to try to get to the foreign markets, because that's really one of the only major ways this country can make any money right now. And it's always been a primary-based economy, but now, since the sanctions, that really is it.
So this explains why President Trump or the Trump administration is targeting India for buying oil from Russia, and why it is such an important issue. We've discussed it in the past, but ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for part two. We are going to discuss that how come the Pakistani military junta, which is providing ammunition and I broke the stories a number of years ago, and it was later on confirmed by mainstream legacy media or mainstream outlets like BBC, that yeah, Pakistanis are indeed providing ammunition to Ukrainians through the UK. Yeah, mind you, and well, that the money coming in because of that and billions of dollars is enabling their tyranny, and that is why dictators in Pakistan are able to suppress democracy. So we are going to discuss that in part two, and the Indian question is very important. How come India is getting away with buying oil, which is critical? The map you're seeing right now, this map shows you the Russian oil infrastructure, and the way Ukrainians are hitting north of Mongolia, and that is almost China. Well, that is a very different story that tells you the global power dynamics and the Great Power Rivalry context, and where does South Asia sits into that. It's a very important question, and we'll explore it in part two. Please stay tuned. Thank you for this part. Theo?
Thank you very much.